You're listening to a production of the National Media Archive. To learn more or volunteer, go to nationalmediaarchive.com.
October 11th, 2000. A coffin moved through the East End of London, surrounded by thousands of mourners. Inside, Reggie Kray, once half of Britain's most infamous criminal duo. His brother, Ronnie Kray, had died 5 years earlier. Both had been locked up for murder since the 1960s. So why were two convicted killers still seen by many as legends? To understand the myth of the Krays, rewind to the start. Ronald and Reginald Kray, identical twins, rose from humble beginnings in working-class East London. Their older brother Charlie was part of it too. They weren't raised as criminals, but this family was anything but ordinary. Former actress Maureen Flanagan met the Kray family as a teenager. She describes the East End in the 1960s, buzzing, bold and brimming with change. She first crossed paths with the twins after they'd returned from wartime evacuation. They were just kids, but already full of presence. Charlie Kray, the oldest, was charming. Their mother, Violet Kray, was described as a classic East End mum, kind, proud and protective. Their father, largely absent. And that absence mattered. There was no real authority figure in the home. Nothing to rein in two boys who were already starting fights in schoolyards and on the streets. Their grandfather, a seasoned boxer, tried to steer them towards something productive, the boxing ring. It worked, for a while. All three brothers trained at Repton Boxing Club. Reggie in particular had real talent. He could have gone pro. But that wasn't the path he chose. They didn't just want to fight. They wanted to rule. As Bernard O'Mahony, author and former associate, puts it, they started chinning people in the street. Taking what they wanted, no apologies. Their notoriety grew fast, but so did their violence. The Krays demanded loyalty. They got it through fear. Still, among their rivals, like Eddie Richardson and Mad Frankie Fraser, there was a strange mutual respect. Women and children were off limits. That was the code. But make no mistake, things got bloody. Frankie Fraser remembered being invited to join the firm. He described it like being welcomed into a mob board meeting, with suits, cigars, and deadly intent. He worked with them for over 2 decades, drove them, lived with them, and at times feared them. Then came Ronnie's breakdown. In 1956, Ronnie Kray shot a man for no reason. A year later, after the death of his Aunt Rose, his mental health spiraled. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and locked in Longgrove Asylum. But Reggie wasn't about to let his twin rot in a hospital. Against the odds, he broke Ronnie out. Meanwhile, Freddie Foreman, a long-time associate, moved into a flat owned by the Krays. He never fully trusted Reggie, who he thought played both sides. Ronnie, on the other hand, was terrifying. Freddie called him a very scary man, a paranoid schizophrenic, a manic depressive, a psychopath, all in one. Still, Reggie tried to reintegrate Ronnie back into their empire. One of the first targets was Peter Rachman, a notorious slumlord. Reggie demanded protection money. Instead, Rachman offered him a nightclub, a power play. But once Ronnie was back, everything fell apart. They filled the club with East End heavies. Thugs with broken noses and stitched-up faces. Customers fled, the money dried up, and the violence escalated. Ronnie brought chaos. His paranoia often led to bloodshed. Lenny Hamilton, a jewel thief, learned that the hard way. He was summoned to a club. 2 men held him down. Ronnie, holding a red-hot poker, told him he'd burn his eyes out. Only a last-second interruption saved him. In July 1964, the Sunday Mirror dropped a bombshell. Ronnie Kray had been in a sexual relationship with Lord Boothby, a prominent Conservative politician. The paper was forced to back off. They apologised, sacked the editor, and paid Boothby £40,000. But the rumours were true. Ronnie's friend, Toby Von Judge, the son of a High Court judge, confirmed it. He confronted Boothby directly, asked him why a man of his status was hanging around the Krays. Ronnie stepped in and shut down the conversation. No more questions. The Krays weren't the only ones enjoying the swinging 60s. Affairs, betrayals and gunfights became part of East End life. Freddie Foreman's brother was shot in the leg by a man named Tommy Ginger Marks, the husband of the woman he'd been sleeping with. The twins got involved. Ginger Marks was later shot dead in Church Street. His body vanished. No witnesses. No trial. Somehow, amid the chaos, Reggie found love, first with a young man. When that went nowhere, he turned to the man's sister, Frances Shea. She was beautiful. and he adored her. But Ronnie hated the relationship. He tried everything to stop the marriage. When it finally happened, he never accepted it. Frances, meanwhile, fell into depression. The marriage turned abusive. She left, returned, and eventually died in her bed, 23 years old. Whether her death was suicide or something more sinister remains disputed. Reggie was devastated. He fell apart. Became an unshaven drunk, lost his edge, and that loss had deadly consequences. 4 months after Frances's death, Reggie Kray committed a murder that sealed his fate. Ronnie had always mocked him, said he didn't have the nerve to do what needed to be done. But on October 29, 1967, that changed. The target? Jack the Hat McVitie, a mid-level criminal who'd taken Kray money for a hit he never carried out. Instead of pulling the trigger, he spent the cash on pills and booze. The twins invited McVitie to a house party in Evering Road, North London. But there was no party. Guests were cleared out. McVitie arrived, drunk and sloppy. Ronnie grabbed him in a bear hug, told Reggie to do him. Reggie obeyed. He stabbed McVitie in the face, then the chest, then the throat, pinning his body to the floorboards. The murder was messy, loud, brutal. They stuffed his body into a car and left it on the street in South London. It was the beginning of the end. By this point, the Krays were already under police watch. But now the murders were piling up. Before McVitie, there was George Cornell, shot in the forehead at point-blank range by Ronnie in the Blind Beggar pub. Cornell had joined the Richardson gang, East End rivals who operated in South London. That made him a traitor. Cornell's last words, looking up at Ronnie, "Look who's here." He was dead seconds later. There was also Frank Mitchell, known as the Mad Axeman. In December 1966, the Krays orchestrated his escape from Dartmoor prison. They thought they could hide him for a while, help him lay low, then negotiate his surrender for a lighter sentence. But Mitchell wasn't manageable. He was massive, violent, and unstable. He demanded women, food, booze, constant attention. The Krays brought in a hostess to keep him company. That bought them time, but not peace. Eventually they made a call. The kind of call the Krays were known for. Mitchell had to go. Christmas Eve 1966. He was led out of a flat in Barking by Albert Donahue, one of the Krays' men. He climbed into a van where Freddie Foreman and Alfie Gerard were waiting. Once the doors were closed, Gerard slammed the front seat door, a pre-arranged signal. The guns opened fire. But Mitchell wouldn't die. He was still moving, still groaning. Gerard ran out of bullets. Foreman delivered the final shot, straight to the back of the head. His body vanished, never found. Freddie Foreman was the Krays' go-to fixer. When someone disappeared, Foreman made sure they stayed disappeared. He knew where the bodies were, Ginger Marks, Frank Mitchell, Jack McVitie, and he never told. To this day, he's considered the only person alive who knows the truth. In public, the Krays kept up appearances. Behind the scenes, they were imploding. The police closed in. Inside the firm, fear took over. Some began cooperating with detectives. The no murder loophole was closing fast. May 8, 1968, arrests. The Krays, their crew, their contacts. All swept up. In court, former allies turned witnesses. Ronnie and Reggie Kray were convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 30 years. Charlie Kray got 10 years for being an accessory in McVitie's murder. Freddie Foreman got the same. Ronnie was sent to a standard prison. A mistake. He should have gone straight to Broadmoor, the high-security psychiatric hospital. But they kept him in regular lockup until it became impossible to ignore his condition. Once transferred, Ronnie tried to live like a king. Expensive suits, gold cufflinks, tailors brought in to measure him. Visitors described him as looking more like a Harley Street psychiatrist than a mental patient. His obsession with image never left. Reggie, meanwhile, started to unravel. Ronnie's death came in March 1995. Broadmoor staff said he looked pale and dishevelled in the weeks leading up to it. Reggie planned the funeral from his own prison cell. 26 limousines followed the carriage through the East End. But Reggie couldn't ride with the family. He was in a prison van, handcuffed, watching it all from behind glass. Security was tight. Reggie asked Bernard O'Mahony and others to watch his back during the service. Not out of respect, out of fear. The Krays had made enemies. Lots of them. With Ronnie gone, Reggie knew the walls were closing in. He had reason to be paranoid. By the time of their arrest, even their own men had discussed turning on them. Literally. There were talks of putting a bullet in the back of Ronnie's head. letting him slump in a car, drive it off the road and call it an accident. People were scared of him. Not loyal. Not anymore. The firm was crumbling. After Ronnie's death, Reggie Kray was exposed. Alone, aging and increasingly vulnerable. His world of power had shrunk to a prison cell. Then in August 2000, doctors gave him a terminal cancer diagnosis. He had served over 32 years. The Home Secretary approved compassionate release, but freedom came too late. Reggie was moved to a Norwich hotel. He couldn't afford the room, so a friend picked up the tab. A man once called King of the East End, now dying in borrowed sheets. In his final days, Reggie made a quiet confession. He had killed one more man. No name was given. But Detective Leonard Nipper Reid, the man who arrested the Krays, later confirmed it was Mad Teddy Smith. Teddy Smith had been linked to both Ronnie and Labour Member of Parliament Tom Dryburgh. Rumours swirled about his relationships, his mental instability, and his sudden disappearance after a clash with the twins. He was never seen again. No body, no trial, just silence. On October 1st, 2000, Reggie Kray died in his sleep. 10 days later, he was buried beside Ronnie. But the funeral was far from the grand send-off he might have imagined. This time, it wasn't about legacy. It was about exclusion. His old associates, the ones who stuck by him, were sidelined. People like Frank Fraser and Freddie Foreman were shuffled to the back pews. Reggie had remarried late in life. His widow, Roberta, had taken control of the farewell. The funeral wasn't for old gangsters, it was for appearances. Even at the end, Reggie had regrets. Told visitors not to make the mistakes he did, told them his empire was worthless. Ronnie never had those moments. He went to his grave unrepentant, never apologized, never changed. And yet, had Ronnie known what his loyal circle was planning before their arrest, it might have broken even him. Several men in the firm, long-time allies, had plotted to kill the Krays themselves. Ronnie was becoming a liability, pacing in rooms like a caged animal, paranoid, violent, unhinged. One night he became obsessed with killing Billy Gentry, a man he believed had disrespected him. He ordered his crew to pick Gentry up. He was ready to execute him on the spot. But cooler heads, just barely, talked him down. When the crew returned, empty-handed, Ronnie went ballistic. They couldn't find Gentry. But the truth? They hadn't looked. Ronnie's own men were staging quiet mutinies. One of them later said it would have been easy. Wait for Ronnie to ride shotgun, pull the car over on a dark road, put a bullet in the back of his head, dump the body down a bank. Clean, quick, done. But they didn't. They waited. And then the police got there first. The Krays were never criminal masterminds. They weren't brilliant strategists. They didn't run a global network. What they were violent, charismatic, and dangerous enough to take over their local patch. But their true currency was fear. And once that slipped, so did everything else. They hurt people who trusted them, killed without hesitation, relied on mental illness and loyalty pledges to keep people close. But in the end, they died in isolation. Regret, paranoia, betrayal, that's what remained. And yet, long after their deaths, the legend still lingers. There have been more than 30 books written about the Krays. A parade of films, interviews, documentaries. Some glamorize them, some try to tell the truth. But every version dances around the same questions. What's so fascinating about two men who extorted families, sexually abused young men and murdered their rivals, often just to prove a point? Was it the suits? The charm? The fact that they gave interviews? Because behind every story, every myth, every polished quote, were victims. Fathers, husbands, sons. People who were never seen again because the Krays had someone to cut them up, melt them down or throw them into the sea. Ronnie and Reggie Kray will be remembered. But not for the reasons their fans think. Not for loyalty. Not for style. Not for power. For fear. For violence. For waste. Because that's all it really was. The future. Not everyone makes it through. But those who do aren't the same as when they entered. They're not fixed. Not redeemed. Just different. A little more aware. A little more ready to try. And sometimes that's all there is to hope for. Prison is designed to strip people down. But the rebuild? That's where the real work starts. One inmate, incarcerated since 2012, was nearly sentenced to death. Trafficking over 3,000 grams of pure diamorphine. That's heroin, and in Singapore, it means the gallows. No metaphors, just facts. He made a will. His family prepared for the worst. His defense dragged across 3 separate trials. The final one, in 2018, ended with an offer, 24 years behind bars instead of a noose. He took it, from death row to maximum security. That sentence, harsh as it is, felt like survival. Now his mother visits him monthly. She walks with difficulty. She had once promised she wouldn't visit if he got locked up again, but here she is, every time. Same seat, same son. He used to fear her. Now their conversations feel like something resembling friendship. For this inmate, 25 years means presence. It means his family can still hear his voice, still see him on the monitor. Compared to execution, that's a gift. The system knows that without support, release isn't rehabilitation. It's a countdown to return. That's why officers emphasize community reintegration. Visits matter, letters matter. Emotional ties are fuel for change. But not every inmate has that. One man's stepbrothers erased contact with his mom. He doesn't even know where she lives now. The same man worries he'll be released with no home, no support, and a daughter who's supposed to live with him. But how can she, if there's nowhere to go? He voices the fear plainly. If I can't support her, I'll end it. It's not performative. It's practical. The math doesn't add up. He sees no path forward. That's where the psychologist steps in. The strategy is not to cheerlead. It's to arm inmates with real tools. Emotional literacy, distress tolerance, understanding that sadness isn't shameful, that anger doesn't have to explode outward or collapse inward. They're taught to feel without self-harming. To understand that violence isn't just physical, it's emotional too. And sometimes the person being hurt is the one in the mirror. One man breaks this down mid-session. He says when he thinks about the past, it swallows him. He can't sleep, doesn't eat, worries spiral. He says it's all his fault, and he's not wrong. But guilt without a plan is just another trap. Others echo similar pain. Their kids watched the arrests, watched the commandos drag them out. That image doesn't leave a child's mind. Now, some of those kids act out. They scream in bathrooms, they reject affection, they repeat what they've seen. And the fathers behind bars, they feel it. Every silence, every unanswered letter. The weight doesn't go away. But the goal is to teach them how to carry it without self-destruction. A televisit might only last 10 minutes, but it holds more emotional weight than most people experience in a week. For those 10 minutes, an inmate gets to see someone who still cares, maybe, or at least someone who still shows up. And if no one shows, that silence cuts deeper than any sentence. Rehabilitation isn't just about stopping crime, it's about unlearning destruction, internal and external. It's about dealing with pain without passing it down. It's about not breaking the next generation just because the last one broke you. Because when the door finally opens, if it ever does, the outside world won't care what you survived. It'll care who you've become.